friends, welcome to episode 83 of Storyteller Conclave. This is a show all about helping you run the best tabletop role-playing game that you can, whether you're a new storyteller or dungeon master learning the craft, or an experienced storyteller looking to take your game to the next level. I am Sarah.
I'm Rob.
How we doing, Rob?
I am full.
Oh my god,
We had a good dinner.
So much sushi.
It was good. It was good. I mean, you know, celebrating with a good friend for a good year.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
So we played any D&D lately. Sean had his game last week. Went pretty good.
How is he liking Foundry now? This is like a second or third?
Yeah, this is a second game with Foundry.
Okay, good.
So we've kind of taken the full round. I've had one full game with Foundry. You've had one full game with Foundry, and this is Sean's second.
I've had a player and a DM experience in Foundry, so that was good.
So I would say it's a lot smoother now.
Nice.
We're still working out some things.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's some prep issues. You just got to make sure that you have all that stuff, because it's not as easy just to pull stuff out on the fly. You have to like import it into the game and make tokens for things and stuff like that. But it doesn't take long, but it does take a significant amount of time that sometimes you need to call for a bathroom break or something like that. You know?
Yeah, but that's the beauty of it, is like a 5-minute break can solve a lot.
Yeah.
And that's great. Mm-hmm. I mean, especially online when you're trying to pull stuff together, having a tool that's functional, available, stays up. I mean, worst case scenario, you refresh the browser window.
Yeah.
That's nice. Because I know you ran into some issues with yours when we were running it, where you were getting it caught up and there were some other things going on with it.
It was crashing my browser altogether.
Right, but you were able to just refresh.
Yeah, basically.
And that's wonderful. That's a great feature versus having to have everybody disconnect, reconnect, those kinds of things.
It happened 3 times, and I think you guys only knew about it twice, because I didn't even mention it the third time.
Exactly.
Back in,
exactly. So that's beautiful. I like those kinds of things. And I think it's good to have your audio and your visuals on separate separate apps or whatever, so that you're never losing the whole connection to a person. Mm-hmm. You know, it's kind of obvious. So, no, good stuff.
No, what I will say though is that Sean and I have been delving really heavily into map making software and stuff like that lately, and so we've been kind of previewing some of the other offerings out there. A mutual friend of ours highlighted to us that there was a Humble Bundle of a bunch of maps and map assets.
Yes, I saw that.
And even dungeon draft mapping software.
Yeah.
And so we were... sorry. Well, that wasn't part of the Humble Bundle.
No.
Part of it was Campaign Cartographer.
Cartographer, yeah.
No, I haven't played around with that.
It's been a long time since I've touched Campaign Cartographer.
But we were playing... We did pick up, for, I think, $15, copies of Dungeon Draft.
Yes.
And so I've been able to kind of compare and contrast that between that and Dungeon Fog, which I really liked. I mentioned that here on the show. And Dungeon Draft is, I would say it's less intuitive than Dungeon Fog in a lot of ways for like interior design and stuff like that. But what it does exceptionally well is nature stuff. There's just a water brush.
That's nice.
And you can just be like, there's a river.
Nice.
And I don't really think Dungeon Fog has that functionality, or at least if it does, I haven't found it. You kind of need to, like, Photoshop draw that sort of stuff. It doesn't have just a brush that does it for you.
Yeah.
And so, you know, they've got slightly different art styles to them and whatnot. So, but I think they're really great for what they do. Mm-hmm. And so we've been watching a lot of tutorials about Dungeon Draft and stuff like that. It's $15 to go pick up. So if you guys are looking for some mapping software and Dungeon Fog didn't scratch that itch for you, I would highly recommend Dungeon Draft.
Yeah, and there are actually really nice videos of it out there, seeing people use it, work with it. I am not an artist, and I picked it up because I know that if I have a vision in my mind of something, I can work with it to get what I want out of it. Mm-hmm. Like, I will happily pay Patreon memberships to get maps, because I need that.
Yeah,
I have a rough idea of what I want, but I'm never going to be that level of visually creative, and I'll be crappy with colors. It's not something I'm good at. But having the availability to do something quick, if I need something and I can't find something out there that meets my needs with the people that I have, it's nice. It's really nice.
Yeah.
So...
Sean was also getting map asset packs and stuff like that too. So you can import those into Dungeon Draft or Dungeon Fog, actually.
Which is nice. And
have those available as assets to put into your maps.
Nice.
And he was able to get a lot of those by joining their Patreon for Forgotten Adventures, I think is the the group that puts all those asset packs together. So,
nice.
Give those things a look out. There's another kind of little shout out. Again, it's not a paid sponsorship. It's just we're finding great stuff out there and want to share it with you as a community.
Yep. So, are we ready to close up this miniseries?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. So again, we're gonna kind of outline where we were going with this miniseries, and that is we're talking about the miniseries talking about random encounters and that they are not really random.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're talking about an encounter, we're talking about a scene, like in a movie, that has a specific challenge that the players have to overcome. I mean, it might be combat, it might be social, it might be some interaction in some way. And it is a stage to showcase their skills in a meaningful way. And it has 3 elements, really, and that's stakes, options, and triggers. And you'll find this in all of them. We've kind of broken it down, but we'll briefly go over those again when we kind of go into this. But the point is that there's always stakes for the players and for the other side, regardless of what the other side is. Whether it be life, it doesn't have to be life and death. It could be money, gift, honors, respect, whatever. Options for the PCs to do, give them availability to be able to make decisions and have results for those decisions, and then triggers for what it means. Where does it go from there? So, this week, we are talking about basically the stuff we didn't talk about up to this point, which is weird.
The out-of-scope encounters is kind of what we've been calling it, but that's not really an official term. It's just kind of like, what do you call that junk drawer of encounters that don't really fit into a combat encounter or a social encounter or a dungeon trap puzzle encounter?
Yeah, maybe it's a mixed bag of those things.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not really any of those, or it could be one of those.
Sure.
And that's kind of where we're at with this, and that's why it's out of scope, is because it doesn't fit neatly into the bag of the things we've already discussed. So what we're saying is that they are not a main encounter. They're not something that was crafted. They still fit into the random encounter style, but they're not directly combat or social encounters or one of like the puzzle encounters. They literally don't fit scope, and that's the thing that we're kind of getting at. It's still a challenge. There's still going to be some plot exposition in it, whether it's information or direct description. But mostly it fills that void.
And I think these are, I kind of like these sort of scenes as and these sort of encounters as like the glue between your main scenes that you use to kind of cement things together to string them from one to the other to the other to the other.
Yeah.
Because you need those sort of scenes. You can't always be jumping from puzzle to social to combat and back to puzzle. It's, there's just got to be some room for just role play in there.
Yeah, and I think your players ask for that. Like, they may want to do something in between. They may need to prepare. Maybe they want to go get information. Maybe they don't feel like they know enough, and you need a way to give them that.
Right.
To help them walk through the scenario. Again, we're not railroading them. We're giving them options, and sometimes on the fly, those options need to be filler.
Yeah.
And
well, plus you can't always be you can't always be on.
Oh God, no.
You can't always be going a mile a minute with action and plot and stuff. That people need those rests to just kind of have a chill scene in between a lot of the. You got to have some lows so you can have highs. And it's nice to slow things down and just have some of these lower scope encounters so that you can give that kind of contrast, so that you have somewhere to go from there when the stuff does start hitting the fan.
Right, but it doesn't mean you have to drop the quality. You don't have to get straight up lazy and tired. You want your players to feel like every one of your scenes are meaningful. If you're going to have a scene that involves an NPC and a conversation, or a place and an event and a challenge, you want it to have some meaning. And it really doesn't take a lot to get to that point.
Yeah, no.
There's some basic things that you can throw together, but maybe some examples before we get into that.
Yeah, I think that's probably good, because we're kind of beating around the bush a little bit here. So what are we talking about when we talk about out of scope encounters? So like smaller bespoke encounters. I had one that was pretty memorable for you guys, was the Battle of the Bards.
Yeah.
I've mentioned, I think, on the show before, but it was you guys were just traveling. It was a 3-day journey up a major road that was well patrolled, so it wasn't like you guys were going to have random combat encounters along it. But there are inns interspersed throughout this road
that we definitely would be stopping at.
Way stops on the travel because they know it's a long journey from one city to the other.
Right.
And so there was one of them was just hosting a battle of the bards, and you had a bard.
Yeah, we did.
In your party, so they entered in, and there was a singing competition, and everybody was performing with their stuff. In the meantime, the Nord got involved in some arm wrestling on the side. You guys were placing wagers as to who would win, and it was kind of a throwaway encounter, in that it didn't. We talk about it needing to have plot exposition. I don't know if there was really plot exposition, but there was some stakes. There was a prize he could have won. He did not end up winning narrowly, but there was a kind of a magic item that would have given him a little bit of a bonus to his performance checks if he'd have won. And you guys got a little bit of world building. You had a little bit of fun. You had some team building. You got to know each other as party members a little bit better through the exercise, and then you moved on.
Yeah. The kind of stuff that I think about is something more like shopping. Like, players asked to do shopping all the time. Like, oh, we're going to go do this thing. Oh, I want to go do some shopping. And usually there's like great, I'm just going to go take a nap while this is going on. There's no reason why that can't be an out-of-scope encounter, a filler piece that makes sense, that gives your players something. And allows them a little bit of plot exposition, but also a meaningful roleplay with an NPC. And maybe it's social. Maybe there's a challenge there. Maybe the guy doesn't want to make the sword or make the shield or doesn't have the potions that you need, but has a few of the components, and maybe if you got him the other ones, he could finish it off.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or maybe you want to negotiate because it just costs too damn much and you just don't have it at that moment in time. All of those are good encounters that show role play with your players, can give a little bit of extra, maybe drop a little bit of plot or world setting that helps identify the players and gives them a little extra.
Might even motivate a side quest for them. Yeah.
And at that point, now they're interested. They're hooked into the game even more just by letting them shop in a meaningful way.
And I dare say shopkeepers are one of your quickest ways to introduce beloved NPCs to your players.
Or feared?
Well, I mean, I'm thinking, as a big critter myself. The obligatory Critical Role mention of the podcast is that Matt Mercer does a really great job of shopkeeper NPCs. And oftentimes, throughout, especially campaign 1, the shopkeepers were some of the most beloved NPCs. In fact, one of them turned out to be a really powerful mage, and they ended up dragging him into, the last battle with, the big bad evil guy at the end, because they just kept involving him in stuff, It's like he owns this magic shop, and he's really nothing more than just a flamboyant gay guy named Gilmore who owns magical fantastic stuff and his glorious Gilmore's glorious goods, but they just fell in love with his character and they kept dragging him into things, But aside from that, you had, Victor. There was that one potion seller in Vasselheim, I think it was, who they terrorized every time they went in there because they would, haggle him down with prices, and then they would get, weird... There's a lot of stuff involved with that guy, but he kicked them out and, would, call the cops on them if they ever came back into his store. But it was character building. It was world building, though, you know? And so when you knew, okay, so you walk into the potion shop and the guy, he's doing this and doing that, and he looks up at you and just goes ghost white and goes, no, not you, not again, You're like, oh, it's this guy.
Nice. And then you have the alternative, which is my plot shop keeper from 7C, who kept coming around because he was actually an Unseelie. He was a Fae. And... what used to be what would have been a very simple scene became this complex gambit of when is he going to show up again?
Right.
You know, when's that shop just going to be in the next town?
I mean, you didn't think he'd be a major player in the campaign,
Not in the least.
And here he is, like, swooping into the rescue to one of our PCs because she put out the call, you know?
She asked for it, and technically she fulfilled some of his goals, so he needed to reply.
He's indebted to her, and that's a thing for the Fae.
Very much so, very much so. And it changed the scope of the game. Again, became something that the players looked for.
Mm-hmm. All because you put in a weird shopping encounter.
Indeed. Indeed. Also, roadside encounters are great.
Yeah.
I like you did one that was the inn, but there's nothing to say that when your players camp for something that they don't find somebody or someone runs into them. Like, why not have another group of adventurers come across their campsite and be like, oh, dear God, do you mind if we set up here as well? You got a nice fire, you know, we'll throw some food on and we've got a bottle of wine.
Right. You know, if something does happen, you've got more numbers.
Exactly.
You know?
And maybe something does and maybe something doesn't, but the whole point is it adds an element of excitement to the players, and gives them a way to interact with each other. Like, you know, you've got your noble characters like, no, I'm not sitting here with more peasantry and I don't even know these people. Meanwhile, the fighter's like, dude, it is dark out here, I don't know these freaking roads, I don't know what's in these woods, let's have a few extra bodies that we can throw in that general direction, you know. So it changes the flavor of the scene, and it gives depending on where it fits in your story, maybe they know the characters. Maybe they've heard of them. Maybe they start telling stories about them that they've heard from other places. Maybe your characters are wanted and they don't even realize it. Mm-hmm. You know, and they're about to walk into a town that has wanted posters of them up, you know, and that gives you those conversations and things that those other characters can have with them, those other NPCs can have with them, and adds flavor to a scene.
Oh God, can you imagine like this other adventuring party coming and camping with you for the night and like being really chill about it and stuff like that, and offering you food and whatnot, and in the morning they stand up and they're like, look, we have your wanted posters and we totally were going to jump you, but you turned out to be really decent people and we just couldn't do that to you. Yeah. So here's your wanted poster. We never saw you. Yeah. Good luck.
Exactly. Like, it wasn't until we recognized you by the fire that that's who you were, but you guys were totally cool. Like, we thought you might be killers by, like, oh God, like, they let us in, they let us into the camp just to kill us? Like, oh shit, you know? And then, you've got the information gathering type that you had put on here, and I always find that to be kind of its own thing, that whether you're interrogating someone or you're sweet-talking someone or you're sneaking in to do something, those kind of encounters are asked for.
Oh, all the time.
Yeah.
All the time. I mean, look, we talk a lot about D&D and stuff like that, but like, I mean, hell, Shadowrun is almost entirely built around this mechanic of, you know, corporate infiltration and espionage, you know, break into the secret lab, steal the plans for the new cyberware generation, you know.
I mean, that's like in Shadowrun, that's a mission on its own.
Yeah, it is.
But at the same time, like in Shadowrun, you could always be like, oh, we're trying to break into this place, and one of the players is like, what's the easiest way? And they're like, through the front door with a key card. Well, where do we get one of those? Well, I mean, those are only offered by these people. Can we go get one of those people? And you're like, yeah, I think you could.
Or even just, you know, this job would be a lot easier to plan if we had the blueprints for the building. Let me see if I can snoop through some archives real quick.
There you go. And, you know, maybe you have to go get into, you know, there's an offline system because the building is, you know, ancient. So you have to go get hard copies.
City archives.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and those are the kinds of things that you want to have an encounter. It doesn't have to be big or broad, but it adds a lot of extra flavor to the moment and lets the players pull a little closer together, you know, to come up with something. And you end up with, you know, the CSI kind of moments.
Oh, yeah, you got to give bonus points anytime somebody throws on some glasses and makes a terrible pun.
Yeah! So, in saying that, we're talking about putting those into your narrative and making it fit. And this is kind of where not only our previous episodes add into this, but really these kind of squeeze in there to make it work so that you have these random encounters as part of your narrative or as their own narrative, which gets kind of interesting in its own example. But if you've got a plot, and let's say you've got a nice start point, you know, the players come to a town and the townspeople are saying they keep getting raided from these guys who are coming out of the mountains, who are stealing their supplies and, and taking their strong, anybody strong enough in town who doesn't fight back, for labor and leave, and you're like, okay, so they're taking slaves. Why are they taking slaves in the mountains? So you've got that as an opening. The plot's there. You know what's going on, and maybe even you see some fire come out of the mountains, and you're like, okay, well, something's going on up there, right? You know how the end is. You know they're going to fight the big bad guy who's working on some dangerous weapon up in the mountains, and that's what, you've got that kind of thing, and his thugs encountered, but there has to be something in between there.
Right, you can't just walk up there, fight him, and be done with it,
So that's where these kind of fit in. Not just the encounters that we've talked up to this point, but narrative encounters that the players want to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you need to have social beats in with your combat beats.
Right.
And sometimes just other beats. A good example of that is when you have a high excitement beat, an action beat or chase beat or something like that, where your players just got done with that, you need to have a downtime beat. Might be a social beat, might be your, introspective beat, but they have to be doing something. For instance, in Lord of the Rings, they have to get through the door to get into the back door of Moria. How do you get in the door? And that was a whole moment on its own, but it was quiet up until the fight sequence at the end of it, but it was meant to be a pause with questions of what's going on, and a step into an unknown encounter. You have to fill those gaps with those moments to be able to shift mood sometimes, to be able to shift action, to be able to get some more story out so that the players know why and what their motivations are moving through things.
Yeah,
Nobody's instantaneously motivated.
Exactly. And sometimes, you also use them so that you can build a journey.
Yeah.
So that you aren't just going like, well, we just walked up into the mountains and fought the big bad evil guy. Well, that was easy. That feels anticlimactic. I mean, even if it is one of the best combat encounters you throw together, it's still going to be a lot more memorable if you had to hunt that guy down first.
Right.
If you had to, fight through his rumpties first. If you had to figure out where his lair was. If it wasn't all obvious for you,
Exactly.
Sean and I actually got into a really great discussion about how to use these sort of encounters to string together bounties, actually, in his game.
Yeah.
We're playing Waterdeep Dragon Heist, and we have a couple of various shades of bounty hunter in our adventuring party. And so slight spoilers for Dragon Heist. I apologize if this is, but it's pretty early on in Dragon Heist, and it's a pretty major thing, I think. So you get a tavern is gifted to you as payment. And one of the things is kind of fixing up this tavern and making it your own and customizing it. So our preferred method, of course, with our bounty hunters is going out and doing bounties.
There you go.
Now, on a side note, you and I and the gang have been playing Ghost Recon Wildlands a little bit. It's a bit of an older game, but it kind of follows the same sort of premise, and it executes it, I think, extraordinarily well, where you have these strategic targets that you either have to capture or kill, but you can't just go after them. You have to find one of their low-level enforcers and intimidate them into giving up where the hideout of the big bad evil guy is, or the lieutenant, anyways. You're not even going after the big bad evil guy. You're trying to take down his empire, one little lieutenant at a time. So you intimidate the lower level henchmen to give you the location of the hideout of the lieutenant. You go to the hideout and you investigate there to find out where he's really hiding out, and then that's going to then lead you to maybe another place where you have to destroy something where he'll have to respond. So he comes out of hiding when you destroy that secondary target, and that's when he's exposed and you can go after him.
Right.
And it makes it a long chain of events to try to get to this person. And so by the time you get to them, they feel important because you put work into hunting them down. And So Sean and I actually had a really great discussion about incorporating those sort of mechanics, and he actually did a pretty good job with it. With what he did during the game. The discussion took place after the game, so I think we'll see some further, maybe changes and improvements to his style there. But at least for the time, what he put together was, we had a bounty target, and so we went down to the dock district and had to strong arm one of his low-level enforcers to give up where this guy was hiding out. And that was great. But of course, one of the questions that kind of came up was, well, how do I know what you guys are going to do? What if I write down that you have to intimidate this guy, but instead you guys decide to bribe him?
Right, or sweet talk him.
Yeah, and so the obvious answer is that you that's it. That works. You might have a preferred way that this guy relates to other people. Maybe bribes work better than intimidation, but if you roll high enough on intimidate, or enough times, or give him sufficient leverage, by all means, the guy gives you the information. If you sweet talk him or bribe him, he gives you the information. If you kill him, he has a note on him that has the information. One way or another, that finding and interacting with this person should provide you some challenges for roleplay, but then give up that plot point so that you can move forward, And then once you've moved forward, you've got your next encounter, and maybe that's sneaking into the secret lair. Maybe that's kicking the door down to the secret lair. I don't know.
Right.
But you've got your next encounter in the chain, and it's these little out of scope encounters, like these little interrogations, or these little smash and grabs, or little stealth infiltrations that will give you your A to B to C to D. So when you finally do get to E, it feels like you've put the legwork in, and it feels like an accomplishment.
Yeah, I mean, it's its own narrative, it's its own series, if you will, to be able to chain just event. And again, even in your examples, you're talking about creating effectively random moments that you in your head know what the important piece to each one of those components are, but really they could happen anywhere.
They really could, yeah.
And again, the options are endless. So they sit outside of this in a nebulous kind of state, but they are encounters. They are small encounters that lead to the larger plot at hand, that are giving you pieces of it, so that each of those scenes have its own meaning. And I think the key components of that, which make it difficult, and even we forget about it at times, is that your NPCs, just like every other encounter, need to have a reason why they're there, what they're doing that day, and what their motivations are.
Oh, yeah.
Adding an attitude to that helps a lot.
Oh, absolutely.
Are they upset because it's cold? Are they angry because they're out of stock? Are they compassionate because it's their daughter's birthday? Are they exceptionally happy because it's the festival and in 3 days there's going to be 300 new people in town buying stuff? Are they worried that they're not going to be available? These are all feelings that you can write down very quickly and use in your dialogue to make them real.
Yeah.
And give your players the sense that every time they enter a scene, it is something that is crafted and beautiful and thought out. And how you answer them, regardless of if that person, if the person's joyous and bubbly, right? But their education is quite low, right? And they decide to interrogate them, you already know everything. How they're going to respond. Because again, they're trying to interrogate somebody who doesn't understand interrogation. They're literally just confused through the whole interrogation. They're like, tell us where this is. I don't know. Like, why are you asking me? I'm a shopkeeper. Like, this doesn't even make sense. I've got to get back to work here, people. Don't you understand? I have a sword to your throat. I have 30 of them in the back room. Do you need it sharpened or something? Like, right. I don't understand, because he doesn't understand the threat that's happening.
Yeah.
At the same time, you can have a big burly person who's normally a gruffy gump Goss, who has it in his mind that the only reason why he was walking down this path, well, he wasn't on guard duty. Like, that's up at the main thing. He was on a light patrol, but he took this route because he wants a scone really bad. And that scone is literally 25 feet behind the players, being laid out, and they're slowly being removed from the cabinet because people are buying them. And his brain is firmly fixed on getting one of those scones.
Oh, God, can you imagine trying to get an intimidation? The guy keeps, like, looking behind you and inching in a direction. You're like, he's going to run, he's going to run, he's going to run. He's like, look, give me one moment. I'll be right back, and just ducks into the thing, buys a scone, comes right back out, and is like, oh, it's still warm. Okay, what did you guys need to know?
Yeah, exactly. Like, he doesn't give
like, that was the key to get him to getting him to talk, you know? It was just get the guy a scone, you know?
I mean, at that person, someone does an insight check, and you're like, he's looking over your shoulder at the bakery.
Yeah.
I'm going to take him into the bakery. You're going to take him to the bakery? I'm taking him into the bakery. Would you like to take this conversation inside? Oh, dear God, please, yes. And that can be a simple motivation that shifts the whole scene to something more interesting.
Exactly. And, I think a lot of times sometimes, like, interrogation scenes really kind of, like, get weird for me.
Yeah.
Because on one hand, you want to be, like, the tough guy edgelord characters and, break a few fingers or whatever, but it's weird as a storyteller to describe that. Yeah. At least for me, So I'm always wondered, like, where do you X card that, and to say, like, he just gives you the information, like...
I think in a dark fantasy setting or a grim reality setting where all of your players are comfortable with the fact of crunching of bones and breaking of knuckles and things like that.
Blood-curdling screams of agony.
You're pretty much accepting that, but otherwise, like, no, do it off scene.
Yeah.
I always like in 7C the way that they break down the descriptions of, like, interrogations and things, usually done by the villains, because they are a visual scene that happens outside of the player's purview, but echo to their reality. So you may hear the whole conversation with the bad guy, and then, you explain that, the view opens up to of the city and the sun setting, and as it crests the horizon and the green light cascades across the water, a scream can be heard from the bellows of the tower.
Oof.
And you're like, oh God, he's either torturing or killing him. And you're like, ooh, like, that sets the tone for who that person is, and, those kinds of moments can be done off screen, if you will, or offset, but still give all of the full feeling of it. A good example was our last session with you. We burned out the basement. You didn't have to go into detail for us.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a little bit, and you could tell at which point we were done listening to the little bit. And you basically just backed off the conversation at that point.
Yeah, well, it basically just said that that you go back to your camp and you spend the evening watching the firelight of the tavern collapsing in on itself.
Correct. You could have explained the scents and screams and things like that, but
I should have.
What was the point?
Yeah,
it doesn't add to the ambiance of our scene. It does. There's no impact meant there.
You killed it with fire. End scene.
Yeah, unless there was a player specifically whose goal was trying not to be an evil person and thou shalt not harm a soul, you might come back to that person and make them a note that says your dreams are, betrayed and dark, and all you hear are the thousands of screams and fire burning around them. And you're like, oh, that was me. I did that.
Yeah.
And let that linger for that player, but it's not that important for the whole group. So
I love the concept of, like, alternate interrogation bribes, though, it reminds me of did you ever see the movie Ronin?
Yeah. Okay.
There's a scene in there with who's the main character? De Niro? Is it
De
Niro?
Yeah.
And he says, I've only ever broken an interrogation once. And this is, like, surrounded by a bunch of, like, hardened, professional criminals and hitmen and stuff like that. He says, I've only ever cracked under interrogation once. And they're like, oh, wow, you cracked? Like, what did they do to you? Did they, were they torturing you? Were they putting, like, bamboo shoots under your fingernails or something? He's like, no, they gave me a grasshopper. And they, like, stone cold killers look him in the eye and go kind of ghost white and go, what's a grasshopper? And he goes, it's like 1 part cream de menthe, 1 part
ice cream,
ice cream, yeah. And They just got him a little tipsy,
Yeah.
with an ice cream drink.
Yeah.
And I think it's great. Sometimes it's just knowing how to ask for things, So you brought up an interesting point too about stringing together encounters, because so my point was using these as as glue to chain together A to B to C to D to E. But your point was very interesting to me, and that was sometimes your players discover a pattern where none was intended.
Yes.
And then there is emergent gameplay that happens, an emergent story where they go, how come we keep running into bandits here? There's gotta be something. And you're like, well, you were running into bandits because I rolled 37 on the random encounter chart 3 times in a row.
Yep.
But now there's a big bad evil guy since you guys are asking.
Yeah. I mean, or you have a situation where they just start asking questions and going down a path, and they build their own summary of what the events were, and you go along with it, and you're like, yeah, that's a great idea. And then they do something silly like, we're going to go find this. And you're like, you're interested in where the homeless girl lives? Like where she stays? Yeah. We're going to go make sure her place is better. Okay. And so you have to come up with what's next in that chain and somehow bring it around to your plot. And the truth is, it doesn't matter where your plot was going. It only matters that this is more information.
Yeah.
This is going to loop back in some way. It doesn't have to be super meaningful. It could be a book. It could be a note. It could be a picture. It could be something that somebody had stashed there. Maybe the house is the first house that one of the henchmen lived in, that burned, and yet there's still enough of it left that there are parts of him in there. So now they know things about that henchman's past, that you were going to show them in some other moment. Mm-hmm. Great. Now they start following that because they want to know, they want to go get this henchman and interrogate him. And you're like, okay, well, that brings us back to plot, but that wasn't going to happen. Mm-hmm. Like, he was going to be hunting them, so now they're hunting him? Oh, all right. So, chaining events that your players put together needs to still have exposition of your plot. Don't necessarily worry so much about redefining your setting or adding extra setting elements or things like that. Give them unique scenes that they're asking for, but filter into it the one important piece of information that reconnects it back to plot.
Yes.
Keep giving them the breadcrumbs to bring them back to plot.
That's something I'm remarkably bad at.
It's hard for everybody.
It really is, because you've got to always keep that plot in the back of your head.
Mm-hmm.
So even when you're BSing a completely improvised scene,
yep,
you've always got to be thinking, how do I further the plot with this?
And the biggest key to pretty much any random encounter is, again, besides having your NPC like we had described, making them meaningful, giving them at least 3 of the components to make them feel meaningful. It is making sure that you know what you as the storyteller want to get out of that scene.
Yeah. That's I think the important part is
know
what your end goal is.
It doesn't matter how they get to it. It just matters what your important thing, and it shouldn't be reliant on their actions. Mm-hmm. It should be 100. That final trigger is nothing to do with whatever they do.
Yep.
If they need to get information, it comes in a book, comes out of somebody's mouth, comes out of some meaningful result of the challenge. Mm-hmm. Boom, done. And failure isn't an option to get it. There's just a consequence.
A consequence, exactly. And that's I think one of your better points there is that just because you fail an interrogation check, like you had mentioned when we were discussing this earlier and putting our topic sheet together, for instance, like, a la Batman, dangling the henchman off of the edge of the roof by his foot and, demanding, who do you work for, or something like that. Okay, so you roll a 3 on your intimidate check.
Right.
Obviously, that's a quote-unquote failure.
Right.
But that doesn't mean you're not getting the information. That just means you have an added consequence to it. Maybe that henchman then goes, I'm working for Don Corleone or whatever, whatever bad guy you throw out there. Yeah. But he's so freaked out, like you've intimidated him too much.
Right.
And he starts flailing out of fear, thinking you're going to kill him so much that he wriggles out of your grip and falls 3 stories head first to his death.
Right.
And now you've got a body. Mm-hmm. And now you're, the vigilante who never hurts anybody has now murdered somebody potentially,
Right.
or whatever,
Right.
but that's a consequence. That's a complication that you've got.
Right. And it's those kinds of moments that define the player. Again, successes and failures should always be about the actions of the players.
Mm-hmm.
And it should create either a consequence in either way, positive or negative, that pushes the story forward for them personally, whereas the meaning of the scene should always continue. Whatever you meant to get out of it, whatever the final trigger was, you got your information, trigger is merely what is the consequence and where do we move from here?
Yep.
Is it, did we succeed and we can just walk away from this and go the direction we want to go? Or did we have a consequence, a failure and a consequence, and now we're now on the run and have to hide to get to where we're doing next? Or does someone know about this? Do we now have to change gears suddenly? So that the trigger that we talk about doesn't necessarily mean that we're triggering another part of the plot. We're just triggering a cascade of events.
Yeah.
That now the players have a choice. And it's one of the hardest freaking things to do is that when you finish a scene, your players should have a trigger for what's next.
They should know where they're going.
Correct. And it is exceptionally hard when you're good at closure and you bring people back to base. And, and when I say base, I mean wherever they started. Their mental start point, their physical start point. When you finish your loop of your scene, they should have a good understanding of what are the options next.
Yeah.
And they should be talking about those options next. Right? And some of the options are going to be grand depending on where you're at in the story. Maybe you just closed up a section of arc, and so now they're waiting to make a big decision. That's great. But any of these little scenes that are leading from one to the next should always feel like the players know what's next on the plate.
Yeah.
Like, do we go after Don Corleone? Or do we now have a problem because we just killed one of his guys who we fully intended on leaving here to tell him that we were coming?
Yep.
So now he doesn't know we're coming, but tomorrow he's going to know because there was a body.
Yeah.
And we have to deal with that. We have to deal with the fallout of that moment. We're now a different kind of player on the table. It was one thing when he's shooting at us. It's another thing that we just killed one of his guys.
Also, the cops wouldn't probably bat an eyelash if you roughed up one of Don Corleone's henchmen
and left him.
But a body has to be responded to.
Correct.
So that changed another
That's
player
no
on the
longer
table.
justice.
Yep.
That's vengeance.
Yep.
You've changed your MO. And in a D&D term, you're now wanted for murder.
Yeah.
It's one thing, and it's funny to say it, but so many times it is acceptable to hunt monsters in worlds. But the moment that you harm an intelligent humanoid, you've violated the law.
Yeah.
And that's where things can get interesting depending on who you're talking to. Because I assure you, the goblins have a different story.
Oh, yeah.
And they may take it very differently if you just bind up their guys and hide them in the cave, and basically give them a knife on the other side of the room that they'll eventually all have to get to get themselves out of it. But, you're done interrogating them. You're not going to kill them. Like, what's the problem? They're just goblins. They're not going to go mess with that town anymore because you just told them. They're going to go move somewhere else. But if you murder them all and you didn't get all of them, there's a good chance that someone's going to want you later. Grub is going to get his friends and come get you.
Think of how many character backgrounds start with my entire family was murdered. And so I became an adventurer to get vengeance on the bad guy.
I've heard weirder stories.
When you murder someone's entire family, you just became another anti-hero's,
Yeah. There was a campaign that I was reading about where literally the opening 0 session, to define the players, he basically wanted to know whether the players were going to be murder hobos or heroes. And these players normally played as heroes. And so he gave them, they were very, I think they were 3rd level they started at, because he just like, I'm getting over the light stuff. But gave them a very light encounter at the first. Basically, they had to, they were taking care of a favor for a lord, and it's like, hey, I've got a farming community that's getting ravaged by these stupid goblins who came in from the caves not far away. That the miners are no longer in. Can you go clear them out of the caves and just, or close up the cave so that they aren't going to be coming out of these farmers. I'll take care of your repairs and anything like that and put you up for the night, but it's going to be a couple days before I can get the caravan ready to go north to the seat of the kingdom. Take care of this for me. And so that was their 0 level, was going to do this, and they murdered all of the goblins in the cave, taking care of them. Basically, they took care of the problem.
Sure.
The goblins were using freaking sticks and very light weapons. They were not even a risk. And they didn't get them all. They knocked out 3 of them and didn't finish them. Left them basically asleep. And so he had those 3 saved off to the side. And as the players leveled up, he leveled them up.
Oh, God.
2 years later.
Oh, no.
Worth of campaigning, they started doing attacks on the players' group.
Oh, that is the long game, and I respect that so much.
Ambushing them, doing that. They had teamed up with an orc group that had also gotten their asses handed to them. They found an elf to interrogate and left them for dead, stapled to a tree with a note on them that was illegible. Basically was their MO.
Yeah.
Any town that they did something good in, they went and messed with.
Oh, geez.
So basically left ruin behind them, and so their respect for these people started dropping. They're like, we don't know who this butthead that's following us is. We get these weird attacks, and come to find out, finally they faced up against them. They figured a way to get them and created a trap for them, and these 3 goblins come out, and they're like, wait a second.
Goblins?
I recognize you guys, but these guys were buff. They were angry. They had all the gear that they had ditched, basically at various places, and they'd ignored. God. So these guys were ready to go. It was a hard fought, and that wasn't even the main plot. That was just extra encounters.
That's amazing.
I thought that was beautiful. But that's a long game.
Awe-inspiring.
Yeah, it's stuff like that can make these kind of side encounters, these out-of-scope encounters, even more interesting, because when the players go to do something and start heading in a direction that's obvious, someone can beat them to it. And you can run into those paths, and you're like, oh, what the heck is this? And it's its own side plot, basically, but it gives the player something extra that they could kind of go after.
Yeah.
So,
you want to do some questions?
Yeah. I think we got time for those.
Yeah, we got a couple questions here. So Knox in the Box. So it's, he says, I guess my first question is, what is an other encounter? So we described some of those. Is something like stealing an item or besieging a fortress. I think those are great examples. Yeah. Stealing an item, that's typically more of your clandestine encounters.
Yeah.
A lot of times you use this to gather information, but stealing an item can be a great encounter.
Oh, very much so.
That I don't know necessarily fits in as a social encounter, as a combat encounter, or anything like that. It can turn into a combat encounter, by all means, if you're seen. And besieging a fortress,
depends on how you do it.
I could actually see that as a bespoke, kind of. I don't know that would really fit into one of the major encounter types.
No, and I think it definitely fits in because, again, we had talked about this before with Siege and large-scale battles. Really, you're cutting it down into little scenes. And so when you're doing little scenes like that, you are talking about random moments and how they're going to get through those moments.
Right.
And the encounter is more about handling the battle at large. What are they doing to besiege a fortress? It's the 4, 5, 6 players are doing it, but there's got to be more involved in this.
Oh, yeah. The siege itself almost becomes an environment in which these other encounters are taking place in.
Yeah. A great example is if you look at the besiege that occurred in Princess Bride. From the moment that they're discovering what to do, to getting the parts that they need, to sieging the front gate, are all tiny little scenes.
Yeah.
That don't tie to the main plot much, but you do get exposition in each part of those. And it's a great little chain of encounters that the players made the decisions on what to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jesus, if we only had a Holocaust cloak. Oh, I can't help you there. Actually, I do have one. Well, great. We've got an idea.
Miracle Neck said it fits so good I could keep it.
Well, if we had a wheelbarrow, I know what there's a wheelbarrow. And those are the types of things that lead from one to the next.
Exactly.
So...
So what kind of systems do you think work best for events like this?
systems?
I tend to like skill challenge sort of stuff.
Okay.
Now, obviously, if one person is doing the talking in like an interrogation or something like that, it is up to them to roll an appropriate social check or something like that. If there's one person sneaking in to steal an item, then obviously it's a lot of their stealth, a lot of their perception to make it through that. But, when you've got groups of things or groups of players, I like doing the skill challenge sort of thing. It's a mechanic that became popular with 4th edition that I've seen a lot of people drag into 5th edition because it worked so well.
Mm-hmm.
And that is basically that everybody has to contribute something.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody can contribute the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of up to the players what they want to contribute and how they want to contribute it.
Yeah.
So like, okay, it's a skill challenge to navigate your way through the battlefield. Well, I'm going to use survival. Okay, how are you using survival? Well, the terrain itself largely dictates the flow of the battle. So I'm going to try to put us into more difficult terrain so that we can navigate it without running into major squads of people.
Excellent.
Okay, cool. You roll me a survival check. Now, nobody else at the table can roll a survival check.
But in some cases, you might give advantage.
Right. Okay, but maybe the next person down says, well, I have a really good persuasion. I can maybe roll a persuasion check to see if I can ask one of the nearby lieutenants or something like that where the forces are moving so we can avoid them.
Mm-hmm.
And you go through each one of those checks and you decide based on the amount of successes the group gets
mm-hmm.
and failures that they get
for the consequences.
What the consequences of that action are. Yeah.
And again, remember, consequences doesn't necessarily mean negative. Consequences are just what are the consequences of the actions.
Yeah.
Where do you go?
Yeah,
so just remember that.
The sun comes out and shines bright and you have a great day is a consequence of,
making
good weather watching and maybe a little application of control weather spells.
Yeah, but I like making sure, and I guess the other thing for me is, and at least from my side is, I like descriptors from players, mm-hmm. but if a player says, I want to use, I'm good at persuasion, okay? And then they make a roll as their first thing that they do. I don't necessarily have a problem with that. Mm-hmm. I don't necessarily need to know what they're doing before they make that roll if they know the direction they're taking, because maybe they can't fully think like their character.
I always still like to ask.
I agree asking.
Just to ask, because some people have a particular way in which they want their character to be narrated.
Sure.
And so even if they are in the camp of like, I don't really know how to say it. Like, I'm not a great, orator like my
mm-hmm.
like my character is, but I want to just try to get this guy to think this about me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now I know how to re-narrate that. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
You rolled a 28. Yeah, sure. You sweet talk the guy, and he comes across like absolutely yes, eating under your hand
mm-hmm.
in exactly the way in which you described.
Yeah. So, but making sure that you're not forcing the vocalization of the player to dictate the success or failure beyond the dice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's my whole thing, is that if a player comes up with an idea and a direction they want to take with it, sure, it could be successful.
Yeah.
There's no reason why it can't be. But you have to come to the realization that the fighter's main way that they're going to do something is fight. A bard's main way is persuasion.
Yeah.
And if you, as the storyteller, get bored that the trope of the character you're working with is using their skill set, maybe that's you and not them.
Yeah, maybe. I mean,
it does get boring. I get it, and we always want to say like, no, you can't persuade that guard to do the thing you want to do. Maybe they're not going to get the result in their mind that they're going to get, but they're still going to get a successful result for rolling a 29. It's going to be some consequence, and again, you're getting them to the point that you want in the plot, not necessarily the outcome that they're expecting.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because again, it all depends on the drive of that person. They're not just going to give up their whole shop to them for rolling a 26, but they are going to give them some extra information.
Sure.
And it's going to get them farther in a plot, which is way more important than
mm-hmm.
anything else. So that's my whole point to that is that remember that when you're doing the scenes, these little encounters and stuff, the success is the success for the player to achieve something within the scene and have a positive experience and a positive consequence. And that positive consequence may not be the exact result they're expecting.
Right.
Your fighter may not be able to kill the dude in one hit, but if he rolls a a 26 and rolls max damage, you know, and totally beats the guy's armor and everything, and he's got like 3 or 4 hit points left, you're like, well, technically he's not dead. But it also doesn't mean that you didn't just catch him off balance and he went right over the wall.
Mm-hmm.
You know, heck yeah, accept that. And then your player's going to be like, well, I didn't kill him, but I guess he's dead. That still counts as my kill. You know?
He spends the next 45 minutes going, ee, ooh,
yeah. You can hear him over the side of the wall crying like a little girl, you know, because he's just hurt his knee, or in the case, crying like a little Homer.
He falls on his keys.
Oh, God, that hurts. So Overwatch says, have you ever introduced an encounter just out of left field, though, that your PCs had no idea how to proceed? How do you keep the game going after that?
Oh, God.
The first one I think of is the gazebo scene.
I mean, I think the gazebo is probably the most famous.
Yeah, where they have no idea what a gazebo is and just kind of try to roll with it, and you're like, how do you not understand this? But I think that's a good way of framing it, is if your players don't understand what you're presenting them, it gets really challenging to try and figure out what you're going to do now.
I don't know that I've ever derailed my own game with but I have stopped them dead in their tracks.
Mm-hmm.
I remember talking about this encounter on a previous episode, though I don't remember the context. But I had an evil cult involved in one of my past games, and they decided to try to assassinate the party by summoning demons. Mm-hmm. And so there were these 3 big demons that they were going to come across as these major boss encounters on their journey up north. And one of them essentially was just standing in the middle of the road waiting for them. And they're like, crap, here we go. And they all just kind of pull out their weapons, and this demon starts talking to them. And he's like, I knew it would come to this, you know, so tell me your names so that I might savor them on my tongue before I taste your flesh. And one of them kind of looks up and goes, wait, really? Like, you want to talk?
Yeah.
We're not just going to roll initiative and fight? Like, are you monologuing? Like,
you monologuing? Yeah, I mean, I have definitely been caught off by players doing something different in a scene than I expected them to do, so I think in that sense there's been some stuff. But I think the closest I got was the ghost encounter in 7th Sea that I did on the ship with you guys, where you had the Spectre who was messing with your minds.
Oh, yeah.
And you guys were all seeing different things, and I had a pretty clear vision of what was going on, and you were all not necessarily on the same page, which kind of worked out for the confusion level of it. Mm-hmm. But I think that was the one, because there was a lot of odd information going on with that scene. Everybody was seeing different things.
Yeah.
And that made it very challenging, and I had to be very specific with everyone about what they were seeing. And it didn't come through very clearly because everybody wasn't necessarily the players weren't all on the ball at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
I think it closed in an accurate way.
Yeah.
I got through the end of the scene the way I expected it to go. But I think I had to rail the scene a little more than I wanted to.
Yeah, probably.
Because the player, as players, you guys didn't see the options beset before you.
Yeah, that's you know, that's one thing with like puzzle design and encounters and stuff like that. Like, you almost have to put it at like a kindergarten level sometimes, because there's so much other stuff going on in games that your players sometimes just don't. They're not thinking on the same deep level as you. You know, They don't have that same overhead view, and when they can only see that little sliver of things. Mm-hmm. You know? Yeah.
And that wasn't a random scene. That was a crafted scene that I'd built, but I think I had crafted it too far.
Yeah.
And I think that's really where you can go too deep with your player, with what you do, is sometimes you have to scale back visions because your players aren't there yet. Yeah. Or they can't get into that depth. And that's okay. I mean, your visions, like my visions are very cinematic. And that can get me into a lot of trouble. When I'm doing my game. So I would say just be mindful of that about your players and where they can end up and how far they can get into your scene.
Yeah.
So
that's good advice.
So
Next week's topic, we're going to be actually delving more back into another system spotlight. We're going to be talking about Savage Worlds this time. So it'd be good to roll up our sleeves and dig into that a little bit. You can find us on Twitter at @ST_Conclave, on Instagram, @ST_Conclave. You can listen to us live every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on mixlr.com/storyteller-conclave. And please join us on our Discord. You can find the link to that up on our Twitter. We tweet that link out pretty often. And you can find it on our website at storytellerconclave.com.
We'd like to thank our Patreon members, especially our contributing members of Nox, Sam, the Arcane Asylum, and Sparkle Motion. We really appreciate all of you and all the help you do to help us get through this every single week. Our pre-show music was Arcane Anthems. You can find that at patreon.com/arcaneanthems. Our intro music was Beyond the Warriors by Guy Frog. You can find that at guyfrogmusic.weebly.com. And our outro music is Only Our Footprints in the Sand by Midair Machine. You can find that at soundcloud.com/midairmachine/tracks.
A big shout out to our families as always, Vicky and Sean. Thank you so much for supporting us. All of our friends who've sat with us at our tables over the years and given us great experiences to share with you, and you, every single one of our listeners. We love you.
Good night, everybody.